Hello everybody. Today we're going to start talking about our photography unit. And so I need you guys to actually take these notes inside your sketchbook, and I'll tell you exactly where and when to write down these things. You do not have to write everything down. This is just to prep us so that when Miss Jill comes in, we'll be all ready to go. We have knowledge and we can actually get her some really good questions about things that we have for our photography unit. So just think about this. You don't have to write it down. Why do we take pictures? In general, basically we take pictures to capture memories, to tell stories, to communicate with others, to prove something, to relate to something, to reveal, to celebrate, to protect, to document, or to also sell or advertise. You do not have to write these down. So in general, whenever we think about a photograph, what is it about the still image, the pictures that we take, that captures our attention? What makes a good photo? And what one thing ruins pictures more than anything? This is the first one I want you guys to write down. Your heading will be photography. And write down the one biggest mistake that you can do is blur, B-L-U-R. That is from an image that is out of focus. It doesn't have sharp, crisp edges, and it's difficult to see what it is. Now, granted, this is an old photo, like where they have the older type of camera, but you guys are basically going to have the exact same concept. You don't have to put your phone right to your face, or if you have this older camera, you don't have to put those up to your face. Just look through the view finder screen. Make sure that you are using two hands, although. Under your bullet points, underneath our blur, please write down, use two hands to prevent blur. Okay. So this is just continuing off of it. You don't have to write all this down, but generally how you hold it is keep your elbows propped up against your torso for support. So that means this young lady has her elbows propped up against her rib cage. That helps reduce jitter. Also put one foot half a pace in front of the other to keep your upper body stable, or you just put into like a locking position so you don't end up moving or wiggling. Hold the camera as steady as possible and then lightly press your button. You don't have to sit there and worry about your shutter button because you don't have that type of camera, unless you do end up bringing a DSLR. Now, don't have to write this down, but when taking your pictures, please ask yourself, do you have a clearly defined subject? A subject is something that you focus on. So I'm focusing on a dog, I'm focusing on a person, I'm focusing on light, I'm focusing on color. Our second question, what feeling are you trying to invoke? So if I'm thinking about a feeling, am I feeling that the subject is sad? There's a light, airy happiness that occurs. And our last question, what story are you trying to tell within the frame? The frame is what we can see within the picture itself. So I'm going to give you guys a bunch of rules. Once you guys know them and understand them and have practiced them, that's how we get to this slide. Rules can be broken, but you've got to know what you're doing first. So there's different types of shot. A shot is just how you take your picture. Don't have to write this down. Keep in mind that you can do a long shot, which is stuff that's far away, a medium shot, or close up, an extreme close up whenever you're looking at the teeniest details, maybe like a honeybee's leg or something like that. There's different types. Now, I do need you guys to write these down, and I'll tell you exactly which bullet points to write down. I need you to write down composition as a header and its definition right below. Composition is the pleasing arrangement of elements within a scene. It is one, the main subject, the foreground and the background, or the supporting subjects. So if I look at our pictures up on the top right, our composition is those arrangement of all of those hot air balloons being blown up. If I'm looking at the picture on the bottom left, it is the composition of the train car versus the hill up above it. And then our one on the right is just the two gentlemen more or less focused in the center and kind of a bilateral symmetry that happens, which means it's chop it down the half, it's more or less the same. focus. Again, please write this down as a header. Focus is adjusting the distance setting on a lens. So that's kind of whenever you're tapping your phone and they have that little square or circle which tells you where you're trying to focus. On a lens to define the subject sharply. Basically, try to produce a sharp image. So if you look at the one on the left, for the most part, the bars that are in the front and middle are very sharp, defined, and so are those little caps that occur. There's stuff that's behind it that's blurry, but our focus is those posts and those caps. And if I look at the one on the right, our spider, our focus is the spider, so he's nice and sharp, but then everything else behind him is nice and blurry. Okay, this next one, our center of interest. You guys will need to write this down. Your header will be center of interest. With a center of interest, each picture should only have one principal main idea, which is a topic or center of interest to which the viewer's eyes are attracted. So you don't have to write all this down, but a picture without a dominant center of interest or one with more than one dominant center of interest is very confusing to the viewer. They wonder what the picture is about because you are not telling them, hey, I want you to focus on this. So when the picture has one and only one dominant point of interest, the viewer quickly understands the picture. Basically, we're telling them, I want you to look at this. This is important. You don't have to write this down, but again, on center of interest, a photographer usually has many factors or elements that can be used and arranged within the picture to draw or direct attention. Some of these elements are lines, shapes, human figures, tone, and texture. Tone is just your value, how light or dark something is. Don't have to write this down, but this is my main thing. Try to avoid placing your subject in the middle of the frame. It makes the picture so uninteresting to look at. This one I do need you to write down. So for our header is rule of thirds. Don't have to write down this definition just yet, but it's just an easy way to create emphasis, balance, and interest in your work. So rule of thirds, please write this down. Divide the picture area into thirds. So 1, 2, 3 across the top, 1, 2, 3 on down, both horizontally and vertically. Locate the center of interest at one of the intersections of the line, marked in green, those little dots, and then you can create a feeling of balance within the composition. So you don't have to write this down, but if you look at the image on the left, the picture of the chair is up a little bit. The center of the back is the most important part, and it's up on that upper left top third so that we created that nice balance and interest of that red chair. So if I look at the one on the left, I chop it into 3 parts on the top and bottom. The center of interest is right there at that young person's head that's right in the center. If I look at my rule of thirds on this, 1, I'm following the edge of the roof, but 2, I also have that tree line that occurs on the other third that goes on the north to south end on the right hand side that creates even more interest. So I got my eyes leading across the top and through the middle. So there it is again, and it just shows us exactly where we're supposed to be looking. This one does the exact same. I have my eye that leads across with that wooden bar, but then our center of interest is that person's face. Emphasis. This is another bullet point I need you guys to write down. So you don't have to write the first sentence, but connected to the center of interest of the composition is emphasis. This sentence I do need. Emphasis is the focal point in a composition. This as well, and you don't have to do the last sentence, but the second one, yes. So second sentence, third sentence, fourth sentence, no. It is where one area stands out or draws the viewer's eye. So again, emphasis, and what I need you to write down, emphasis is the focal point in a composition. It is where one area stands out or draws the viewer's eye. Okay. So under emphasis, another bullet point, you can write down framing, composition, and contrast. Leave a little bit of space in between those three. So, a photographer can show emphasis through framing choice, whether he chooses a vertical or horizontal format, or he might show emphasis by the placement of the subject, governed by rule of thirds. So, if you guys are talking about framing, if I look at the picture below, it is framed basically by the horizon line where that grass touches the sky, but I also have the rule of thirds that's helping me out with the placement of that building. Another one that I need you guys to write down is that angle or viewpoint. I do not need you guys to write down the second paragraph, but I do need the first. So an angle or viewpoint is the various positions of the camera, high, medium, or low, and left, right, or straight on, can give a different viewpoint, perspective, or visual effect. The proper viewpoint or camera angle is an important factor in the good composition. Repositioning your subject within the viewfinder frame and changing the camera viewpoint or camera angle are the two simple ways of controlling the composition. Basically, with angle and viewpoint, you are showing your people that you want this picture to be viewed by. This is something that I saw that was different than what if I was just walking down the street versus now I'm on the street where you actually walk and I'm tipping my camera up to see how maybe a bug would feel. I'm basically forcing somebody to look at something in a new way. Another bullet point is light and shadows. I do need this entire paragraph. Light and shadows. Lighting is an important creative element of composition. By controlling the light and directing it where you want it, you can subdue objects or distracting elements in the scene to give more emphasis to the main point of interest. So our main point of interest, yes, is dead center. Oh my gosh, they broke the rules. But it is more interesting because he's so small back in the back that I'm more focused on the light that occurs and the shadows that were coming out from the posts. If you want to write down some of this, you may. You do not have to write down all of it. But under light and shadows can be used in the composition to create mood, draw attention to an area, or to modify or distort shape, or to bring out form and texture in the subject. So if I was going to go look up at the picture on the top right, I am focused on this really weird, funky tree, and I also wanted to record its shadow. So I'm doing like this weird tree versus the lamppost that's right between it. So that helps us just record what we just saw, and that's really interesting because you don't normally see a tree that looks like that. Our second paragraph, shadows are a key to apparent forms in photographs. Without shadow, the subject records without form, curvature, or texture, appearing flat and lifeless. So if I look at the picture on the bottom right of the, it looks like a fossilized shell. The different form, because you can see the textures that occurred because of the shadows and the light that's hitting all these different ridges, it's so much more interesting because we zoomed in and I'm focused on that texture and those lights and shadows that occur. Framing. I did need you guys to write this down as a separate header. Framing is a technique photographers use to direct the viewer's attention to the main subject of the picture. I do need you to write that down. So if I was to look at the picture on the right, I have the trees and foliage that occurs around the edges. That helps frame our picture, and we are looking out into another subject. So we're looking out on this lake versus I'm just staring at trees. So positioned around the subject, a tree, an archway, or even people, for example, can create a frame within the picture area. You do not have to write that down. Subject enclosed by a frame becomes separated from the rest of the picture and are emphasized. Again, you don't have to write that down, but that occurs on the picture at the bottom left. I have this old building that helps frame and says, hey, look at this church that's right there in the center. You don't have to write this one down, but framing, looking across a broad expanse of land or water at some object, can make a rather dull and uninteresting view. Moving back a few feet and framing the object between trees improves the composition. So it would be boring just sitting there, okay, so I see some sheep, I see some grass, I see one tree. And then I stepped back, and then I looked and I said, I like all these trees around the outside. That also helps balance the light and dark in the picture as well. Line. Please write this down as a separate header. And I also need you guys to write down the full paragraph. Lines can give structure to your photographs. They can unify, pull them all together, the composition by directing the viewer's eyes and attention to the main point of the picture, or lead the eyes from one part of the picture to another. They can lead the eyes to infinity, out way. We're hitting our 2-point perspective, that dot, that's infinity. Divide the picture and create patterns. So at the picture on the bottom left, I'm creating these nice divisions of all these lines. If I'm looking up at the picture on the right with our seagulls, those seagulls are leading us up to look at that boat. You do not have to write this down, but at the same time, this really helps if you guys think about it. So line, through linear perspective, that's our 1-point or 2-point perspective, lines can lead a sense of depth to a photograph. Parallel lines appear to converge, creating our vanishing point, creating the illusion of depth. So our center on the picture on the bottom right is that person that's leading to that door in the subway. Or I have all these pathways on the picture to the right and the bricks that help lead us through that little pavilion that occurs. You do not have to write these down, but it is a very important thing to think about. So line, vertical, which means up and down, diagonal, from left to right in a crisscross line, horizontal, our flat line that goes across the horizon, and curved lines create different moods. Vertical lines, up and down, create a sense of strength, rigidity, power, and solidarity to the viewer. On the other hand, horizon lines, where it goes from left to right, represent peace, tranquility, and quietness. Diagonal lines represent movement, action, and speed. A picture with diagonal lines conveys a feeling of dynamic action even when the subject is static. So they, in the picture on the bottom left, decided I'm going to put a little bit of a diagonal line to these things that are really flat, straight, calm. And when they did that, it created a little bit more interest, because it's not like, okay, well, I have all these lanterns just sitting there. Our next bullet point is pattern. You will need to write both paragraphs. Our first one, patterns, both natural and man-made, bring a sense of visual rhythm and harmony to photographs. Patterns appear wherever strong graphic elements, lines, colors, shapes, or forms repeat themselves. So I see lots of repetition in all of these. We have the triangle in the center, we have the curved arch that's happening on the left, and then we have those beautiful flags on the right. You do not have to write this down, but again, pattern. Creating your picture around repeating elements or patterns provides unity and structure. Pattern repetition creates rhythm that the eyes enjoy following. When lines, shapes, and colors within a picture occur in an orderly way, as in a wallpaper, they create patterns that often enhance the attractiveness of photographs. Texture, our next bullet point. You will need to write down all of these, including the mini bullets right beneath it. Texture is about how things feel to the touch, or how our eyes would perceive it. There are several different types of textures. There's rough, smooth, jagged, soft, shiny, etc. You can always add more to this list if you wanted to. So if I was to look at the picture in the center, it looks like they have sand in those dunes behind it, so that would be a soft or a smooth texture with a little bit of pebbly in there. Then I have this grass up front that's kind of more of a jagged, and if you've ever walked through that type of grass, it's very rough and it actually can cut your skin, so I'm creating the difference between the soft sand versus the really rough, ouchy grass in the front. Okay. Texture can bring out, oh, you don't have to write this one down either. Texture can bring out a tactile, like how things feel, dimension to your photographs. Framing is important too, especially when you want to give texture a leading role. So that is meaning I'm thinking about how everything looks and sets within my picture when you want to give texture a leading role. Texture helps to emphasize the features and details of a photograph. So I see all of the beautiful shingles there. I also see some of the paint that's left over, and then the gorgeous weathered texture of the outside of the windows that are there. Contrast, our next bullet point. So contrast, you don't have to do the bottom paragraph, but I do need the top. Contrast is using elements that conflict. They're different with one another. Contrast can create interest within a work or direct the viewer's attention to a particular point of interest within the piece. Some examples can be included using complementary colors. Those are the opposite on the color wheel. Value, light versus dark. Size, small versus large. Texture, smooth versus rough. Age, old versus new. Space, positive versus negative. Line, thick versus thin or long versus short. Shape, organic versus geometric. And lastly, our subject matter, pleasure versus pain. So if I'm going to look at the picture on the left, one, I have size difference between the man on the left and the character that's up on the top right. I also have, I would say technically like a subject matter difference. So that would be an organic living human being versus a caricature of something. That is also another different type of contrast that I see here. You do not have to write this down, but contrast is an effective means of directing the viewer's attention to the center of interest. Positioning the subject elements to create a contrast gives them added emphasis and directs the viewer's attention. So if I'm going to look at the picture on the left, I have a really nice rich background. I can't really see much besides like some really dark gray leaves. And then in the front, I have that bright white, I believe it's a pelican. Balance. Here's our next one I need you to write down. As our bullet point, we have balance. This is the arrangement of elements so that no one area overpowers. Balance includes how all of the elements are arranged and create stability in a piece of work. So if I look at the picture attached, we have chopped right down the center, and then we have two of the exact same elements on both sides of that center line. I do need you to write down two key words from this. You don't have to write down everything else, but symmetrical and asymmetrical. So our picture up top, if I go back to it, that is symmetrical. I chop it down one way through the center and it's the exact same on both sides. Same thing with the one up here. Even though it's slightly different, I can still chop it down the middle, and for the most part, it's almost exactly the same. You do not have to write any of this down, but symmetry conveys balance and proportion in photography, so just what we were talking about. It is a form of pattern that illustrates spatial awareness, often through the reflection and rotation. Using symmetry or asymmetry is an artistic tool that allows one to fully explore different compositions. Reflections can be an example of this. So I chop it pretty close towards the center. I have all of my windows up top that are real, and then I have my reflections at the bottom. So if I was going to look for an asymmetrical picture, that means that I have more weight on one side and I have less on the other. So I can chop it and say, well, I know that it's a flower, big huge flower on the left hand side, but I have a really small flower on the other side that has a lot more detail. That's an asymmetrical balance. So for our next one that I need you guys to write down as our bullet, we have color. Color can be used to help tell stories, and it can be used to communicate on an emotional level. Color can make a photo feel exciting, lively, or sad. Color can also be simply used as an element to focus on when taking photographs. Please only write down the first 2 sentences. Our next one that I need you to write down is rhythm and movement. That's our next bullet point. You do not have to write down the last sentence, but I do need the first 2. Our first sentence is having a repetition of elements in your photo can produce the look and feel of movement. Movement is the path the viewer's eye takes through the work of art, often to focal areas. Such movement can be directed along the lines, edges, shape, and color within the work of art. So if I'm going to go look at the picture of the left, obviously, if I was a human being in this area the same as the gentleman, I'm going to go walk up those stairs. So because he's moving in the direction of the stairs, my eye starts leading up and going up those set of stairs. If I'm going to look at the picture on the right, my eye follows all those nice dark lines because all I really have is that light background behind it. And it looks like actually that's a shadow, which is pretty cool. Our next one that I need you to write down is negative space. You need to write down both sentences. So negative space can give your photograph an entirely different feel. It's a lot of empty space. Negative space can add a stronger emphasis on the subject and evoke emotions or moods. So if I'm going to go look at the picture on the right-hand side, I have a ton of sky, desolate ground, this one little building, and these little scrappy trees. There's not much there, and I feel like I'm lonely. I'm the only person there, and everything else is dead. It's gone. Our next one I need you to write down is depth of field. Depth of field is the amount of distance between the nearest and farthest objects that appear in an acceptably sharp focus in a photograph. Depth of field depends on the lens opening, so really that's where you tap on your phone. The focal length of the lens, you don't really have to deal with that as much, and the distance from the lens to the subject, that is very important. So if I look at the picture below, I am focused with my depth of field on the ball 12, and then I have a medium focus on that red ball that's in the center, which helps lead my eye over. My next one is that orange ball on the left. Again, it leads my eye over, but it's a lot more blurry. I keep having that depth of field that gets blurrier and blurrier as I go back. For portraits, you don't have to write all this down, but when you're taking pictures of people, try different angles. Don't do your typical selfie shot. Don't do it straight on. Also, try to have your subject look down or to the side for a few shots. When taking a portrait, try to get your subject to move around their eyeballs. They're not looking at you. That's boring. Unless you really want it as like a super intense photo, the likelihood that you're going to want your subject to focus on you is nil to none. It will loosen them up, and the photo result may be surprisingly good. Also, just follow this person around. Try to capture candid moments and emotions. So this is just how a person would normally react. You're just following them around with the camera and you just took a picture. Your photos will look a lot more genuine. Everyone has special details about them. Features, interests, likes, and dislikes. Try to capture them in the photos if you guys decide to do portraits. Also try profile pictures. They often feel a lot more dramatic. If so, get your subject in front of a simple background. So that's where all I see is one eye, edge of the nose, half of the lips. That's a profile. You can also get close for portrait photography, especially when taking photos of children if you decide to go that route. Avoid busy backgrounds when photographing a person or object. Basically, our eye automatically goes to a person because we as a human species rely on fight or flight. So our eye doesn't focus on everything else, we focus on the people. Are they a threat or are they not? And so we can't unprogram our brains, so just make sure that you guys focus, not busy backgrounds, not anything else around, you're just focused on that person. Also try different crops, super close-ups to highlight somebody's eyes or smile. Try full body shots with a lot of negative space to highlight the pose or the environment. Some extra tips. Remember how we talked about those viewpoints? This is very important because I'm going to be looking for a few of those. Don't just do a typical shot. Try shooting your subject from a variety of different viewpoints. From above, from the same level, like you typically would be standing at, looking up at them, or from various different angles. So I'm sitting on the concrete, I'm laying up against this wall. I'm trying to get all these really nice different angles that nobody else would normally see. If you're photographing a subject that has movement, don't worry so much about the composition. Just keep snapping away or you might miss a special movement. Technical corrections can be made later. So later on, we will be getting on the computers. I'll try to get you guys either into the computer lab or we'll get some Chromebooks, and I'll teach you guys some different programs to sit there and crop photos or edit them. Avoid using flash. Oh my gosh, this is so key. We do a lot of outdoor stuff. We'll be going outside. Don't use flash. It looks fake and unnatural most of the time. Also be aware of where your light source is coming from and how strong it is. If it's too bright, and especially if you're like taking pictures of people or something that's white or light, try to darken it up a little bit. Have somebody come around your side, pull up a coat or something like that, trying to reduce the light. Or if it's too dark, try to get it into a different angle or viewpoint that might have a little bit more light so that your camera phone can take in that light and actually create a really nice picture for you. Also, it's really best to shoot photos in the morning or early evening sunlight instead of the harsh afternoon sun, aka you guys will actually have to do some of this photography on your own time. Overcast and partly sunny days are also really good for lighting. Take vertical, which is our up and down, as well as horizontal, left or right, photographs of the exact same subject to see which subject or which of the pictures captures your subject better. Compose your photos in which your focal point is not always dead center in the composition. Please don't let me see a ton of them where they're dead center in the picture, because quite frankly you're going to be bored with it and nobody else is really going to be interested either. I want to display these, and we're also going to potentially show them in a couple of different shows, so try out different things. That also leads into the next one. Experiment with putting your subject matter in a corner of the composition or slightly off center. So that's that rule of thirds. We're chopping our paper into 3, 1, 2, 3 across the top, 3 across the side, and hit one of those green points. Capture as much light as you can, especially if you're using a cheaper camera, aka your phone. Move or ask your subject to move into a best source of light as possible to help you out and to help out your picture. With your cell phone camera, do not zoom in. Get as close as humanly possible and use your cropping skills to fill the frame and find the perfect angle. Later on we can always edit. Please zoom in with your actual physical self. Don't use the zoom in function on your phone. It creates a blurrier picture and then you won't be able to work with it as well. Good luck and have fun.